You probably prefer to be in bed this morning. Most of you were reluctant to get up. And we were just saying earlier, probably because Dr. Pandit is here, he comes from D.C. and all the cold is there. We'll have to send him away so we can get our warmth back. But this week we finished our training seminar on Come and Search. On average, we had about 90 to 100 for the entire week. We started off with 200, but we averaged off over 100 each night. And so many people, we had the surveys back from the training session, and many people were very impressed and want to take it on another level. So that presentation that we had this past week is going to be given to the public. And so this Come and Search seminar, these invitations, 130,000 of them are going to Chattanooga today and Monday. So there'll be thousands of them getting out there. And we've got a few here for your friends. And this is the only seminar I can say with confidence that you can invite your secularist, atheistic, non-Christian, former Adventist to these seminars. And you can feel totally comfortable that their toes, or the small toes, won't be trampled on. And so most times we ask people, why don't you bring your friends to church? And they're afraid what they might say in the class or in church. And so you can be totally confident that these presentations are going to be totally neutral, and we're going to present evidence there so that they could make the decisions in the end. So if you need advertising as you leave, take a few and pray about it and give it to a friend that you're scared to go to. You know, tell them, hey, this is one I haven't come to you anytime, but now I've plucked up the courage to give you a personal invitation. And if you don't have transport, I will come and pick you up and take you to these meetings. And so let's pray about it. And the Bible says we've got to sometimes step out in faith. And so this is the time, and you might not have the opportunity again to invite your friends, your families, your neighbors, and this could be your opportunity. So let's bow our heads and pray. And this morning, gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for the week that you've given us, and we thank you for the rest. We thank you for the safe traveling mercies. We thank you, Lord, that all our lives were spared this week on campus from the ordeal that we experienced. We're so grateful. And Lord, we ask you to be with Dr. Rick Nosko as he presents. May God, you touch him with words from above, and may we be inspired as we listen to him. In Jesus' precious name, amen. Now, no introduction for Dr. Rick Nosko. He's you know him on campus, and he's been here. And so let's put our hands together for him.
Thank you. Testing, 1, 2. I better be on my best behavior. I see a few of my students here this morning, so they're going to be grading me this time, huh? I became familiar with this book, You Lost Me, about a year ago, this weekend, actually. And I read this book, and it really changed the way that I thought about those that have walked away, those that are walking away, some of the college-age students. And perhaps the things that we talk about today will help you as you think about maybe loved ones that you've had that have left the church, maybe some of your friends that have left the church. This will help you understand perhaps some of their faith journey, and perhaps some of them will come back, some of them will not. So let's just go ahead and get right into our presentation. If we can turn the light down for just the one up front here, Sam. At the end of the presentation, the other one, we'll have 3 of the students come up, and you can talk to them. Instead of us talking about college students, we're going to let them talk and see what they have to say, and you can ask them some questions. So here's the book, You Lost Me, by David Kinnaman. It was put out in 2011. Actually, the research was done by internet surveys and also telephone surveys over several years before this. And in this book, the author addresses several reasons why young Christians are leaving the Christian church, and then he suggests ways to help them return to faith. This is not David Kinnaman, by the way. This is Jesus. This is the reason that we're here today and the reason we're talking about this. The research that the Barna Institute discovered was that more than half, 59% of 18 to 29-year-olds are dropping out of active involvement in the church.
The church with a capital C or
This is the Christian church. And that was the first question I had, was when I read this book, is this true for Adventist young people as well? And as I've looked at some of the statistics, and we'll learn in the next few weeks when Ken Rogers is here and Doug Jacobs, that the statistics are very similar for Adventist youth as well. The first line here is a question. Ever dropped out of attending church after going regularly? They looked at Protestants and Catholics and then took the average. It's 59% is where this figure comes from. And there's a few other questions here. Ever personally been frustrated about your faith? Went through a period when you significantly doubted your faith? And went through a period when you felt like rejecting your parents' faith? This is with a group of 1,296 people that they asked the question of. There's more than one way to drop out or walk away from the church, to leave the church, and each person's journey is specifically their own unique journey, but there are some ways that we can group some of these experiences into several groups. And so I put an outline here on the board for the class this morning. We have 3 ways to walk away from the church, to leave the church, and then some characteristics of the mosaics or the millennial generation, which we'll get into here in a minute. 6 reasons that are given for leaving the church, and then 3 ways that maybe we can slow down this exodus that we're seeing the last few years. The 3 ways to leave the church are characterized by these 3 words, or these 3 groupings of individuals: the nomads, the prodigals, and the exiles. And the nomads are a group that Kinnaman found are walking away from the church engagement, but they still consider themselves Christians. I wondered before I read this book, everyone that leaves the church is not a Christian, right? They walk away and they don't consider themselves Christians anymore. That's not true. The group that's considered nomads, this group, they actually consider themselves Christians. Now, you couldn't tell that sometimes by a casual view of this group. They don't appear very Christian in some of the lifestyle, but still, if you ask them, they say, yes, I am a Christian. Perhaps the word lukewarm can help characterize this group. Prodigals, they actually lose their faith. They say, I'm not a Christian anymore. Sometimes this group can be hostile, but they are actually leaving faith, and they will tell you that. The prodigal group is only about 10% of this 59% that actually are walking away. And then the exiles, think about the story of Daniel when he was in Babylon, and this is where Kinnaman came up with the term exiles. They're still invested in the Christian faith, but they really don't go to church. They kind of feel stuck between culture and the church. They're the group that perhaps are into creative things like the art careers. They feel like they're reformers in society, or maybe reformers in the church if they do hang around part of the time, but they're really not culturally engaged, and they feel stuck between their culture and between their church.
What percentage of those?
Those are about 40% is what they found. The nomads are around 40% of those that do leave.
Nomads or exiles?
I'm sorry?
Nomads or exiles?
I'm sorry. The exiles. The exiles are about 40%. Let's just talk a little more about these groups, and then we'll get into the characteristics of this generation. Nomads are also called wanderers in some of the literature. They put faith on a shelf for a time. They don't really discard their faith altogether, but they just say, well, I'll look at faith a little bit later in life. This may go on for months, this may go on for decades, or for their whole life. But they still describe themselves as Christians. Their involvement in the Christian community is optional. It's not really something that's necessary for my life. It's something I can do or something I don't have to do. And they're not really angry or hostile. They just say, well, I'm just not that engaged. Prodigal views, Kinnaman found, were all over the map. They had all kinds of different views. They have varying degrees of resentment. Sometimes they resent their parents if they happen to have the same faith as well. And they say, though, specifically, I am no longer a Christian. There's 2 reasons that prodigals tend to go on their journey. The first one is that they have rational reasons. I don't believe that God created the earth. I don't believe that God exists, for whatever. So they have these rational reasons of why they leave. And then there's the other part of the prodigals that say, I had emotional reasons. I was hurt, and I was offended, and I've left the church. I remember one student a few years ago. He went to church south of here, I won't name, who sat in somebody's place, and the deacon said, "You're sitting in someone's place. You need to move." He was already on the edge, and so he left and never came back. Exiles can be described as hopeful, but they still kind of feel lost. The story of Daniel is a good story to remember for this group. They found new ways to be faithful to God. Daniel certainly did that when he was in exile. And so this group is able to take their society and their church, and should they become engaged again, create new ways to interact with society and with the church. Now, in order to reach this current generation of faith-minded individuals, or to reach this current generation, faith-minded individuals have to know how to translate their faith. We have to be able to speak the language of this group. And the term "you lost me" it actually means I don't get it. Wait, I don't understand what you're trying to say. Something's lost in the translation. So how can we speak some of the language of this group? Well, first of all, we have to understand what this group is. These millennials or mosaics, as Kinnaman has referred to them. The mosaics or millennials were born in 1984 to 2002. Some authors say it's from the year 2000, from the year of 1980 to 2000. But these are today's older teens and 20-somethings, the 18 to 29-year-olds. Then here's some of the other generations here. I'm a baby boomer myself, but the last three here, busters, boomers, elders, this is not going to be on the test today. So you guys don't have to remember that one, okay? But this, the first group, is what we're going to have to remember. I'm always being asked by students, is that going to be on the test? Most mosaics or millennials are so profoundly unique and changing so quickly that this is the reason that they chose the word mosaics, because a mosaic is actually a collection of, let's say, a mosaic window or a mosaic painting is a collection of lots of different colors. And so this group is quite diverse in their technology and some of the other makeups of this generation. There's 3 A's. The first one is access. They're continually connected, continually having access to information. They're connected to each other through the internet, through smartphones. I tell the students, they say, "Well, Dr. Norsky, why don't you get a smartphone?" I said, "I'm not smart enough to use a smartphone." But which reminds me of another story. Last year, I learned how to text. I can text poorly and slowly. And so I was telling to the ladies in my, the students in my A&P class, I said, "Oh, look, I've learned how to text." And they were sitting there with their smartphones, and I pulled out my phone here, and I said, "See, I can text on this phone." And they said, "Oh, yeah, that's a flip phone. They don't make those anymore." The way that they're continually connected has affected how they think, work, and socialize and worship. For example, smartphone apps can be accessed to locate Indian food near Southern Adventist University. You can check the menu at the cafeteria. You can receive money. Notice I didn't put down sending money. Students don't have any money to send to anybody. And then making news. This happened just 2 days ago on Southern's campus. We had an incident here that nobody was hurt, but there was a student next to me in the room where we were. He took a picture out the window. This picture he posted on Twitter. Somebody took and posted on Facebook. Then Channel 3 picked it up from Facebook and had it on their news, and this happened all within 10 minutes. Leonard Ang is his name. The student, it's public, so I can use his name. And then USA Today. So it's just amazing how this continual connectivity has changed the way that news is being made and the way that we interact with our world. I was just amazed. I knew about Twitter and Facebook, but I didn't know that this would happen within 10 minutes to be on the local news. Alienation is the second A of how the millennials think. They are alienated to different institutions. They're skeptical of institutions such as church, big business, marriage, other institutions that you can think about. And many of them, even though they're connected, through the internet, they still feel isolated in their relationships. They feel somewhat lonely sometimes. I heard a few weeks ago, I was talking to one of the professors that said students that spend lots of time, and even older people that spend lots of time on Facebook, get depressed sometimes because people are only presenting their wonderful life, what they're doing here and there. And you look at that and you say, oh, my life is just so minuscule and minimal compared to all these other people doing all the wonderful things, and they're sitting back there typing stuff in that maybe half of it isn't even true. So, I'm sorry?
Describe teenagers and young adults of every generation. They are skeptical, they're alienated,
Yes,
they're looking for an identity.
Yes, it does, but this group is different because, for instance, marriage is being put off later and later in life, or it's being gone altogether, as opposed to the younger generations where they got married in their late teens or early 20s. Now students are getting, and the college grads are getting married in their late 20s. And sometimes they're not even marrying at all. They're just living together more and more. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. That's a very good question. But it seems to be a little different with this generation. Adulthood has non-traditional paths now as far as establishing careers. More and more people in this group are freelancing and self-employed. You're not going to see very many of the millennials working for the same company and getting the gold watch at the end of 30 years and they retire. It's just not going to happen in this group, and we see that more and more, that people are not sticking with the same jobs, and they're not saying they're changing jobs much more frequently now. They're skeptical of such institutions, as we were just talking about, such as marriage. It causes them to defer marriage, or maybe they don't get married at all. They just live together, or don't get married at all and stay single. So some of these skepticism is affecting their views on life. Skepticism of authority also has affected the church. The Scripture is not considered reliable because they're skeptical of authority. You know, the authority is their peers or the internet. And it's not necessarily people that happen to know. Young adults consult the internet before parents or pastors many times. I've said this myself. I found it on the internet. Yes, but is it reliable? And this is the reason that we try to talk to our students about not using unreliable sources in their papers. Wikipedia was not something that we use in the science department because it's not reliable. It's not peer-reviewed. And some of you may want to argue about that, but you can see me afterwards. The culture of Christianity and the Christian influences is much less affecting this generation as well. Billy Graham, Rick Warren, and James Dobson. Do any of you guys know who these people are? They're under 25? Okay. You know who the last people are, right? Oprah and Dr. Phil. Everybody knows who they are. I saw Dr. Phil yesterday on television, you know. But anyway, the authorities, or the skepticism of authority, makes some of these people less important in their lives. So, why do so many 18 to 29-year-olds walk away? Is there any questions, first of all, in this first part? I probably should pause and let you have some more input.
I got a question. Are these statistics, is it changing, or is it the same way it's been on these stats for like 30 years?
No, these statistics are changing, and I'll show you in one of the 6 reasons given that actually society has changed. And so they're finding that these statistics are changing. It's not been the same way for 30 years. That's a good question.
Well,
Yes?
you know, historically, being firmly entrenched in middle age, what we see is that kids tend to come back when they have kids of their own, and they're taking kids out of school and this sort of thing. So it makes sense. If they're not getting married till later, they're not having their kids until later, if they're having kids at all, and so on. So the thing that tended to bring our generation back was getting back in with our kids. If that's being postponed, then that would make sense.
Well, hopefully that will be the case. Unfortunately, it's not as much. The exiles are the ones that many times will come back. The prodigals do not usually, and the nomads a lot of times do not. So they're seeing from the statistics that more and more people are leaving, and we would all hope and pray that, yes, this is just a blip in their faith journey, but the research is not bearing that out. So it's something certainly to be concerned about, I think. And of course, I know you are concerned, but it's not just the way it's always been. Here's the 6 reasons given by millennials, their perceptions of why they leave. no single reason does cause 20-somethings to disconnect from the church, but the reasons for leaving are loosely categorized in 6 areas. And again, remember, everybody's journey is unique to them, but you can still see some things that kind of put people in certain groups. We don't want to pigeonhole people, but perhaps maybe you can relate to some of these reasons yourself in the past, or maybe presently, that you're having some issues with. Just because the perception exists doesn't mean this is reality. So keep that in mind, because as I read through this, I was a little offended from time to time on some of these reasons, but then I got to thinking about them and say, there's no reason to be offended. This is a perception, but perception is reality. I had a good friend once that used to say, when you're a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. Overprotective is the first. Creative expression is stifled in the church, this group feels. And the church's main concern is seen as safety. And this is throughout our culture as well. There's so much concern about safety now, more so than when I was growing up. There's all kinds of things we did that were considered unsafe now when we were kids. And so you may see this in culture as well. The church demonizes everything outside of the church. Therefore, it's not safe. 23% felt that was true for them. And look at this column over here. These are the columns that Kinnaman continually refers to, so kind of ignore these, because these are the ones that he used to validate some of these 6 reasons. Church ignores the problems of the real world, and my church is too concerned that movies, music, video games are harmful, because it's part of being protective. It's difficult to insulate ourselves totally from the world, especially if we're going to minister to those within our realm. And some have used an insular approach to faith. Perhaps it's not very practical. Sometimes it's maybe not even very biblical. Now, there are several ways that you can insulate yourself from the world. I put this little video here. When's the last time that you ate lunch with a non-Adventist? You don't have to answer that, but think about that. Are we insulated from the world so much here in Happy Valley that we don't actually get to talk to those that believe differently than we do? Exiles especially want to connect their Christian lives with the world in which they find themselves. And that creates a bit of tension, but remembering that credibility with the world should not be more important than what God has directed us to do. There's different ways to insulate yourself. Here's, this is the text that I really like. It says, for they are not of the world, but then Jesus says, I don't want you to take them out of the world. And so that gives you something to think about, is how we interact with the world. Here's one way to insulate yourself from the world. This ultra-Orthodox Jewish man on the Huffington Post in April, he wrapped himself in a life-size bag to keep himself insulated from some of the people around here. I think it had something to do with women sitting next to him. And this actually blew up on the internet. Oh, by the way, those that are over 30, do you know what blow up means?
Do what?
Blow up or blew up? Tell them, guys. What's it mean? Go viral? Yeah. This went viral on the internet or blew up. No, the plane didn't blow up. This went viral on the internet or blew up. Anyway, he was insulating himself, and I'm not making fun of him, but this was his concept of how to insulate himself from the world. Is that, you want to get closer? Yeah. Okay. Perhaps this is not a bad idea with the flu epidemic right now that we have, is to have a plastic bag around this. If we get overprotective, perhaps we ought to look at discernment as a better answer to this overprotective. Here's some examples. Everything that is not Christian is evil. Discernment might say, let's see the good that God has created even in secular disciplines such as psychology and literature. Let's take the good and leave the bad. Another overprotective way that church might interact is strict rules about media. Avoid reading or watching current events. Well, if you want to use discernment, you can read the Bible and the newspaper. Of course, for the millennials, this would be reading the internet, because that's where they get most of their news from. Shallow is the second reason given for leaving the church. The church is perceived as boring, not connected with careers, not connected with reality. And here's some of the reasons given here in the survey. Church is boring, 31%. Faith has no relevance to my career, 24%. The Bible's not taught enough. That may surprise some people. But The young people were looking for more biblical-based type instruction in some of their youth groups. The separation of faith from their real lives causes it to be boring and not relevant. Biblical illiteracy, there's a lack of deep understanding. Many youth evangelists, when questioned in a survey, could not give a single text of the Bible as a basis for their faith in Christ. Some of this group sees Christianity and God as a moralistic, therapeutic deism. Deism means God created the world and just left it to run on its own. And therapeutic, my therapist is always on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's just kind of moralistic. There's not much biblical basis behind some of the thoughts of why God exists and why we're Christians. Most of those that walk away never had an adult mentor in church. Tom Rainier talks about in his book, Essential Church, if a young person does not know another adult in church, they will leave 90% of the time. The Bible study and career connection with older members gives substance to church, and so this is something that we want to consider. More Bible study and more of a career connection. I'll talk more about that. Apprenticeships is perhaps what should be addressed with the older and younger generation. What has God called you to do in partnership with the community of Christ followers? This picture that I don't have up here. It's a story anyway. There's a story of the flower. Why does the flower have a lot of color? Why do flowers have a lot of color? Yeah, to attract bees. What happens when the bee gets to the flower if there's no nectar there? It leaves. What attracts the bee to the flower is not what keeps the bee at the flower. And they found that in youth ministry, with the programming and music and all, if you have a lot of programming and music, that's nice, but if there's no substance, then the young people are going to leave. And that's indeed what's happened with the youth programming we've had over the last 20 years. They've discovered 5 years ago this is not working. The youth come and they stay for some of the programming, and then they walk away. So we're going to have to rethink this, and there's been several people done research how to rethink how we can connect intergenerationally, which we'll talk about in a minute. Anti-science is the third reason. Faith and science are incompatible, which is a false dichotomy. They really are not incompatible. And as many of you came last semester to the class here, we discovered reasons of how faith and science can be answering the same question. There's actually distrust on both sides of this faith-science divide, and if you come to Dr. Snyder's presentation in 2 weeks, I think he says he's going to have one side's going to be the church group, and one side's going to be the science group, and we're going to have to talk to each other. Science has different types of questions that they have, and they're continually revising questions. Church, they're very sure of what they believe all the time, it seems, and maybe that's not totally true. Maybe there are some things that need to be talked about. Christians are too confident that they know all the answers. 35% of this age group thought that was the case in their life. Churches are out of step with the scientific world, and Christianity is anti-science. Youth group teens who aspire to science-related careers in a 2009 poll found that 52% of youth want to go into science-related careers, so things such as medical, health-related careers, engineering, veterinary medicine. When they asked youth pastors and youth workers how many of them addressed issues of science in the past year, it wasn't so much. What percentage do you think had addressed science issues in the past year in their youth programming? Anybody want to take a guess? 1%. Now, if we're not addressing science issues, who's going to address these issues? People that do have questions. And some millennials don't have questions about science and faith, but a number of them do. Here's a sad story. A prominent scientist, David Kinnaman, talks about in his book, said every week he's contacted by young Christians who tell me their faith cannot survive their interest in science. They feel the church has forced them into an either-or decision. They can either stay true to the Christian faith or become an intellectually honest scientist. That's a false choice, of course. If we're not helping young Christians pursue their calling in science in a way that affirms both science and faith, we're going to lose a generation of scientists and a generation of Christians. And I'm here to tell you that there are students on this campus, not many, but there's some that I've talked to personally in the last month that have questions exactly right here. And one of them told me last month, he says, I can choose science or I can choose religion. Which is it going to be? It's a real thing. We need to stewardship or take under our wings those that are involved in science, going into science careers, talking about the philosophy of science, what is your worldview, and we need training to, as Kinnaman says, think clearly, honestly, comprehensively about matters of science, because it's so much a part of our everyday life. Okay, let's review. We have reasons that millennials leave the church overprotected. They feel it's shallow, anti-science. Here's the last three: repressive, exclusive, and doubtless. Repressive has to do with religious rules, and this mainly has to do with sexuality and rules about having sex outside of marriage, and also just all the rules that they see. And several students have told me this: the reason I left the church is because there were too many rules. I want more freedom in life. I cannot find it in church, and I have to live a double life between faith and the real world. Fifth one is Mosaics feel the church is exclusive. They want open-mindedness, acceptance, and tolerance of others. And they see church as a members-only club. Here's how they felt: churches are not accepting of gays and lesbians, 38%. This is a big issue that Doug Jacobs found in his study, The Adventist Connection, which he'll be presenting on the 15th, that the way that the former Adventists think that the church feels about gays and lesbians, not accepting their lifestyle necessarily, but just even being nice to them, this is a big issue as far as being accepting. And Christians are afraid of the beliefs of other faiths, almost 30%. Church is like a country club only for insiders. Remember, these are perceptions. This generation is influenced by inclusiveness, diversity, and political correctness, ideas that have shaped this generation. Here's how things have changed. And this was referring to have things really changed in the last 30, 40 years. In 1960 in the United States, 80% of the population was considered white, and now it's 50%, a little over 50%. As far as faith, 90% were Christians in the 1960s. Now 62% are Christian. And family makeup with children, 5% were unwed mothers in 1960. Now 42% unwed mothers. So there's been quite a bit of diversity in our culture. It's here to stay. And so how are we going to interact with people now in our society at large? And I put down this: we accept, quote unquote, anyone. I had some good friends years and years ago that said we accept anyone that is open-minded, except those who are not open-minded. So there can be a double standard there sometimes. They didn't say that, but that's what I finally figured out after several years of this bothering me, this whole concept. If we accept the terms of exclusion versus tolerance debate, we end up losing. Exclusion in the church lacks love, but if we're too tolerant, then we lack courage to tell people what they need to hear. If we use exclusion as our operation of how the church should be put together, we get our wagons in a circle, we make a fortress, and we keep everybody out, or except just for the very select few. But on the other hand, if we shrink from sharing what the good news is that God has given us and not tell people kind of what they need to hear, then that's too much tolerance. Perhaps we need to get out of this whole debate and just realize that we're all outsiders. No matter if you're in the church, if you're out of the church, we're all considered outsiders. And I think that that's really the best way to think about this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. How to live wisely among non-believers and make the most of every opportunity, I think, is a challenge for each of us. And here's the text: be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace and seasoned with salt, so you know how to answer everyone. The sixth reason given for leaving is doubtless. The church doesn't feel like this generation doesn't feel like the church is a place that they can ask important questions in life. And here's the research. I don't feel I can ask my most pressing life questions in church. 36% felt that way. Almost 1/4 said I have significant intellectual doubts about faith. And I have had a crisis in life that made me doubt faith. Doubts many times are seen by other church members as a lack of faith, or perhaps they're even afraid to address doubts because perhaps some of us don't feel that we have some of the answers like maybe we should about doubts. Doubts can cause a struggle with faith, but it's not always the opposite of faith, and sometimes asking questions can help you become more strong in your faith. I remember studying out the gift of tongues when I was back in high school, and I felt much better about the gift of tongues after I studied it out. I did take French for a semester, and my teacher told me that he'd never heard anybody speak French with a Spanish accent at the end of my course, so he gave me a passing grade. But anyway, that was not the speaking in tongues I'm talking about. The prodigals especially have doubts when questions seem to arise. If they do arise, they happen the junior, senior year of high school or college. And not everybody that is in this group does have doubts or does have questions. So remember, each person's faith journey is unique. Christian apologetics, as you notice, are still important when a number of the... Let's go back here. 18% had... I have significant intellectual doubts about faith. 25%. So our Christian apologetics are important. Of course, Relational Christianity Sabbath School, this is what we've been talking about all last semester, and I think even before I started coming to the class last summer, is about how do we answer some people's doubts that they might have. But we need to shift from more of a traditional proof text, beat them over the head with the Bible type approach, to more of a relational type approach in answering. So, what's the answer? Any questions before we go on for our last section? We have a few students we want to have come up here, so we got to finish here so we can have them come up and let them talk. There's no easy one answer, but there are three approaches that Kinnaman outlines in his book. Here they are: rethinking relationships, rediscovering vocation, and reprioritizing wisdom. Think about rediscovering vocation and careers. Think about vocation and careers kind of being the same thing. These are the three things that we can do to help reduce reasons for dropping out. First one is rethinking relationships. I know several of the pastors over at the Collegedale Church are really in tune with this, and I had lunch with Pastor Will a few weeks ago, and he was telling me about how this mentoring of younger members by the older members and this seeking wisdom of the younger members of the older members is really important, and this is the paradigm now of where youth ministry should be. Church is a generational partnership with all age groups, and we're finding that this is what really has students and 20-somethings stay. In this study I mentioned earlier by Tom Rayner, he found that as the number of adults that a young person interacted with and knew in church increased, the percentage of them leaving went down. So there's a direct linear relationship, inverse relationship. The more adults that you know in the church that you interact with, the fewer young people leave the church. Career and calling is the second reason to reduce walking away. Christians don't know how faith connects to their life many times, their life work, and so trying to help us perhaps and others that we work with, how does this connect? For example, how does a biologist who has to be around evolution out in the world in their teaching environment, how do they connect with faith in Christ? How does their career have a connection with faith in the church? This adoptive student ministry, we had this program last fall where students were adopted by a church member. There were some issues with it, but there were some really good positive stories. A student told me 2 months ago about her adopted mother. She said, "Boy, I really got lucky. I got a great adopted mother, and she invited me over for dinner, and to eat." I said, "Well, that's really nice." I said, "Was that all?" She said, "No, it's more than that." She said, "She's a nurse. I want to be a nurse. She took me to her job and introduced me to some of her other nursing friends. And I'm so excited about this. So that's the part that keeps the bee at the flower. What draws the bee to the flower may be the food, but what keeps the bee at the flower is this connection with careers and this sharing. Older folks, they like to have the shadowing type of relationship or seeking wisdom from the younger, and the younger group can benefit from the wisdom of the older church members. The third thing is seeking for wisdom and discovering how to connect rightly with God, others, and our culture. This is not an easy thing, but it can be done. So, intergenerational ways to connect at Collegedale Church and Southern Adventist University. This is where it comes back to you. How are you going to get involved? Maybe you're already involved, so the message is not do more, but the message is just do something. And the something can be as simple as learning another person's name, maybe another church member's name, or maybe a college student's name or an academy student's name, and saying hi to that person. I remember growing up, there was this man at the door. He always said hello to me every day, and we would talk, and he'd ask me, how's school going? I knew he was going to be there. Mr. Klein was his name. He was always there at the door for years and years. I can still see him standing there at the door. He's been dead for years. But that made an impression, just the fact that he knew my name, and he had a smile on his face, said, hi, how are you? How are things at Academy? How are things in college? As I was growing up. Connect intergenerationally. How are we going to do that? Here's some ways. Marty Miller has some incredible stories. I could talk for 10 minutes on each of these programs, what I found out, but this is an incredible story about those that have just graduated from college that have met with him. This is people, though, of all age groups. This is not college age. This is high school, college. Those that have graduated, those that are 40, 50, 60 years of age. Men's ministry, you can call Marty at this number. Adopt a Student Ministry, I just told you about, happened last fall. It's going to happen again, but there is a program coming up called Renewal at Home, where we're going to be, Katie's her daughter that goes here. They're going to have this connecting up of not just food, but let's go ahead and talk about something beyond food. And the food's a good thing, don't get me wrong, I like food. The Great Haystack was another one. Again, I think if I'm going to ask Ken what their thoughts are as far as connecting the Great Haystack with some follow-up. What about careers with the college and the adults? Older adults. College students or adults. And then another way, the Lights volunteers. You want to get involved at Southern Adventist University. Leslie Schwartzer is in charge of the Lights volunteers, where you can go and volunteer there. If you want to go for an hour a week, or you can get involved there. And there's the website. And then finally, Kaya. Now, this is a little younger age group than we're talking about, but Pastor Will told me that the students that graduate from Collegedale Academy, once they graduate, they don't know where a lot of these students are. Where do they go to college? They're off and about, and they don't know what colleges they're in. They need somebody to help track the class of 2014 at Collegedale Academy, just to kind of try to keep up with some of the students. So there's always to get involved. Finally, Kinnaman talks in an interview for National Public Radio. He says, this generation has the ability to help an older generation, an establishing generation. Many traditional churches deal effectively with the issue of science and social media in greater roles, and yet, at the same time, young people need the input and wisdom of today's older generations. This goes both ways. This is not just about giving by the older people. This is also about both ways that a benefit is seen. What's so beautiful about this next generation is they actually really want the wisdom of today's grandparents and elders. They're facing huge questions, as every generation does, but they're very open to the input of older adults and the wisdom that they could offer. So this idea of reverse mentoring, we need young people to help enliven, invigorate our congregations. We also need older adults to give a good life coaching in the midst of these very difficult and complicated times that young people are facing. Okay, I've done enough talking. Let's have our three students come up. We'll let them talk, and you can ask them questions. You can ask me questions. Some of the questions, you guys come on up. Some of the questions that I want to start off with, and you can ask me questions as well about the talk, is some of these young people have left the church and have come back. Some of them have never left. Some of them are working with those that are still here in the church at Southern Adventist University. These are all 3 college students here. And so why did you leave? Why did you come back? Why do you stay? These are some of the questions that you can ask these students. And we talk about people all the time. Well, let's let them do the talking. And you can ask me some questions as well. And I think, let's see, is this the mic we need to use? This one? This is the one we need to use. Okay. So, any questions, or you want me to start off? Why did you? I know 1 or 2 of you have left and come back to the Adventist Church. Why did you guys leave? Oh, let me tell you who our students are. This is John, Cherise, and Tiffany. Okay.
First of all, it would be good to know their background, like whether they were raised Adventists, whether they
Okay.
were baptized.
They can address that. Good. Excellent. Excellent.
I guess it's a journey.
A little closer.
I think it's a journey, journey of compromise. I guess that's where it started. But my background, I was growing up Adventist.
Louder, John.
Raleigh, Seventh Day Adventist, and North Carolina. I didn't go to public school until community college actually, and that's when I actually finally decided to not be. I didn't want to go to church. My dad actually ended up making me go to church anyways, but or else he'd kick me out of the house. But I guess yeah. Besides that, I went to high school, Adventist high school, and I think the biggest thing was just one decision after another of compromise that led to the final decision of like not wanting God at all, and then trying. I guess that was the innate like underlining feeling. I didn't want to believe in God, so I started trying to think of ways to not have Him in the picture. So, and then those doubts became real and started changing my paradigm, you know. And yeah, that's what I would say.
I didn't grow up Adventist, and my mom, as a child, I saw church as a place where you're supposed to go. And I never went to church as a child, but rarely. We went church hopping. We went to the Methodist church, the Baptist church, the Pentecostal church. But my mom came from a Catholic background. And so she knew that their beliefs, how she grew up, she thought there has to be something else. And because this isn't right. And when my mom finally was baptized in the Adventist church, I was around 9. And for me, I just saw it as another church that mom was going to, and as the child, you follow your parents. And so it almost became, I saw it as a bunch of do's and don'ts, because instantly mom started, what do you mean I can't eat bacon anymore? I can't watch cartoons on Saturday. It became very much, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I was very turned off by anything religious, because this was my first exposure to church as a consistent thing. And so that's part of the reason why I didn't accept Adventism until I went to Academy, when I first had my experience with Adventist education my sophomore year.
My name is Tiffany, and I'm 21 years old, and I'm from Houston, Texas. I was raised Adventist as well. Growing up, my family was really into Bible stories, taking me to church, and the children's Sabbath school, and I loved it so much. And my grandfather was a pastor, a Spanish pastor, and I went to church with him and my grandmother too, so that was really great. I never really left the Adventist church, but I would maybe be considered a nomad. There was a period when I didn't go to church, and because my parents actually decided they didn't want anything to do with Adventism, simply because there was some misunderstandings at our church, and they felt rejected and hurt. And then they told me, oh, Adventists are terrible people. But I eventually went back to the church because of my grandmother. She picked me up one day and was like, I've told this story before, but for those of you who haven't heard it, my grandmother was like, okay, Tiffany, we're going to church again. I was like, I don't really think I want to go, but sure, whatever. And people at the church were really kind, and that's what kept me there, was all the really kind adults and really the youth. They were really sweet. They kept inviting me to do things with them, to eat with them, and I was very reluctant, but they kept doing it, and I was like, well, I don't have a car, because I think I was about 15, 14, and they were like, oh, we'll come pick you up. It doesn't matter. So that was pretty cool, and that was kind of like my journey back into rediscovering, like, oh, that is church, maybe they're nice people.
What caused you guys to be attracted to the Adventist church? What keeps you in the Adventist church?
Last year, I would say that I think a lot of it has to do with who you're around. Because when I was around atheistic people, smart people, quote unquote, I was attracted to that. And then when I came here again, I was around people that were spiritual and made me start thinking about, what is this? What is it about this God? Is it something that is real? To believe in a higher, being. And I thought about, I guess, the end of my life and how quick it would come, and the reality of we're not here forever, And so I had to just think about, am what I am following is right, or is it wrong? And so I guess that's what brought me back to thinking about the Bible and about Jesus. And what's kept me in it is just, I guess, partly realizing that the world doesn't really have much to offer, and it's not really something that makes you full like Jesus does, And it is still hard, of course. You have to fight. It's a battle every day. But I guess that's what keeps you in it, is that you are happy, And so.
What attracted you?
Who's got a question, I guess?
Do they ask questions?
Oh, sure. Yeah, somebody has a question. You have a question?
Yeah. It's more of a theory, and I just want to see what you think about it. Kind of a shallow theory, but let's see what you think about it.
Is it mine?
We're taught as Christians from early on, Bible stories, as you suggested, and my daughter as well, that really we are saved by grace. And if we have this propensity as humans to explore, not just physical earth, but all of the don'ts, if you will. So as we get older, and our world is sort of in this bubble, and, it's kind of, there's a limit to it, if you will. The question is, if we are saved by grace and from forgiveness, why not explore for a little bit? So the statistics show that people leave when they're 18 to 29, and many of them do come back. Do they feel that it's a low risk? If I go outside and I step away from it for a little bit, I'm going to come back. Is that something that goes through young people's minds?
In my mind, no, it didn't really. I didn't actually care. I didn't care if I died. It's like, really, if you think about it, you're dead. You won't know that you're dead. You're just gone, So, who cares? That's what goes through atheist minds. They just enjoy the 70 years or 80 years, 90 years of life, and they're gone. Once they're gone, they have no idea that they ever lived. They have no consciousness. So, I don't think that goes through some people's minds, I'm sure. It didn't go through my mind. I didn't actually care. So, but when I guess I thought of the shallowness of that, and like, really? Why am I, giving up a possibility for real life, beyond this little measly time, finite part of, life? And so I guess you have to, you have to think about the real chance of amazing life, of real knowledge that you gain. But to answer, I guess your question, I don't know what to answer. I don't know.
I think that it's okay to have students and young people ask questions, but if they go out and actually explore too much, there's things such as pregnancy, brain damage from drug abuse, etc. So I think asking questions from a safe place within your religion, but asking those questions, I think maybe has the best of both worlds.
I have something to say real quick. I don't think it's bad to explore. I've had questions, and I was like about other religions. I think at this age group, I think it's good for us to ask questions and wonder, because then we're just robots and we just believe everything our family tells us. And if you guys had done that, maybe some of you would have never found Christ because your parents told you this and that's what you believe. But I don't think this is my opinion, I don't think we need to go try everything out there, because it's really easy to get stuck somewhere and chained and bondaged by sin. So I personally don't feel like I need to go try everything. But I do have friends who try everything, and I listen to their experiences, and I read different things, and I listen to different things, and ultimately then I come to my own conclusion of, following Christ is a lot more better than what this world has to offer. So I don't think young people should be condemned for saying, oh, well, I don't understand grace and righteousness, and Jesus said he's coming back, but he's going to judge me for what I do. That doesn't make sense to me. Or having other questions. In fact, I think that you guys should be very open to answering those kind of questions, because I know once I had a biblical question, and I asked some people who were very knowledgeable about the Bible, and the answer I got was, why would you ask that? Of course. Why would you ask that? Haven't you been, haven't you been in church? Haven't you heard that story millions of times? And I was like, I'm sorry, it just doesn't make sense to me. So, I went and searched it out myself. But no, I don't think it's wrong to ask questions, but I don't think you need to try everything out there.
Just really quickly to respond to your question, you stated, "For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourself, it is the gift of God." And many, I really struggled with this verse in high school. And I learned, some people are like, oh, if I'm saved, for by grace, are you saved through faith? I can go out and try different things, and I can come back to God, and he'll accept me and forgive me. And I really believe it has to deal with a saving relationship, a loving, saving relationship with God. When I went to academy my sophomore year, I studied the Bible and studied the cross and learned about God's sacrifice for us. And God, when you study the cross, it just completely boggles your mind, because I learned as I got closer to Christ, as I developed that loving relationship with him, as his love began to consume my life, I realized that, wow, I wouldn't want to go out and try different things, because you're hurting Jesus, you're hurting God. The more I was exposed to the truth, I realized, I can be saved by faith, but because I have that biblical foundation, because I have learned about God's love, I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to, do that, because it's a special gift that he's given to us.
Behind. Yeah, she was.
Oh, she was? Okay.
As a parent, I'm the parent of two teenagers, and you try to want them, to go to church, but at a certain time you feel like you're also supporting them, controlling them. So what would be your advice when you feel like the kids want to go a different way yourself in your household, but you don't want to force it on them? What would be your advice to parents?
Well, I would say my dad did it right, I think, maybe. If you want to live, in the world, live by yourself and shove them out of the house, Pretty much. He made me go to church. Oh, I didn't like it, but I was still going, I guess.
Do we set boundaries?
That's why I came here, actually, because I wanted to get out of the house. But do you set boundaries? Yeah, of course you do. God sets boundaries, But I think an important part is love, you know? And I think if you don't show, like, I don't know, too much boundaries puts them off. But just enough boundaries sets them right and gives them a good foundation, you know? Without those boundaries, you have no foundation. It's kind of like the Ten Commandments. We have our base morals that you make your decisions on. But if we didn't have those, where would we be, right? So you still have to have set guidelines, but not too set. You have to give them freedom, you know, freedom of choice. God gives us freedom of choice, so it's a balance. So.
Those of you that have to go, feel free to go. We're going to, I think, go another 5 minutes here, and so if you have to go, go ahead.
I have two kids in Southern, one graduated from California Academy last year. He has lived with us for almost 2 years. And we're going to pick him up today to bring him home. Pardon me? Well, he lives in the ghetto. Chattanooga. He's agreed to come home.
Praise God.
Praise God.
A lot of decisions. Interesting. But I think one of the big challenges for me, I mean, every generation has had challenges raising kids, especially when they get to be teenagers and they consider themselves adults or might be adults. And I think the big challenge, and I see this among the college kids in their church, all of the generations, not just ours, they are surrounded by secularism.
Yep.
They have their cell phones, their smartphones all the time, all the way through church. They're watching movies, the same movies that secular people are watching. There's the music. I realize that people in different generations always say, well, why don't you listen to classical? The next generation, why don't you listen to light rock? Or why don't you listen to heavy? You know, I keep going, now we're into this rap, and we're into all of these types of music that are getting. I just think, I wanted to get your feelings on how you can compartmentalize 6 days of secularism and somehow become Adventist on Sabbath. That's the way I feel my kids are.
I can answer that. Yeah. Just real quick to what she was saying too, and it'll answer both of you guys. I think if you're not showing your children love at home, that they're not going to want to go to church. I think, in my opinion, what I see with a lot of parents is that they have their beliefs and the rules, but Jesus isn't even living in their heart. So they're very stern people who are just, don't do that. Why are you doing that? That's not right. Stop doing that. And it's an attitude that put me off in the past, and I know puts younger people off. I see them at my church, and I see their parents, and their parents want them to follow Christ, but I don't see their parents maybe doing things right on the outside, but where's the love? Where's the acceptance? And, I'm trying to reach out to you, sort of thing. So I think if you want your children to stay in church and want to go with you, you need to fall in love with Christ again. And then they'll fall in love with Christ as well. Because if you can't form a loving relationship that's open with your children and bind them to your heart, they're not going to want to follow you. And as to what you were saying, I think a lie that I fell for, I was telling Cherise, that I fell for was that, you follow God, you can't have fun and enjoy life. And I think that's a big lie from the devil. So I think the thing to do would be to show them, hey, there's a lot of things you can do that you can enjoy your time doing, that is still something that would glorify God. And you can make that with Bible studies. Like I lead out a small group here at Southern, and I try to make it interactive and fun and have food. And I don't know, you just have to show them, hey, like there's other things you can do that's enjoyable. And you don't have to be stuck in this secular world. And I have a lot of friends who have fallen for this lie. Hey, you can't have fun unless you're partying 24/7. And that's not true. It's really not. So I may be surrounding them, introducing them to people who live a lifestyle that's enjoyable, but that glorifies God. Maybe it's the way to go about that. And even introducing them to music and maybe movies that you find interesting, and taking them out places to see different things. Not just locking them up in the house and saying, okay, don't watch this and don't listen to that. I mean, they're going to want to do it.
There's no question that I've seen my kids directly influenced by their friends. They have a different friend group the next month. And their attitude totally changes. So it's almost like it's like their communions almost. It's not totally in love with God today. Oh, I was
Mhm.
partying. And now, it's funny how they can,
Environment changes a lot.
you know,
It's I guess I feel like when I was around certain people, I would start. Well, I don't know. Initially in high school, I was a cult porter, and I was around a lot of spiritual people, and every day I was fired up for God. But then when I went to high school, there was a different crowd, man. And then it was high school, Adventist high school, Great Lakes Adventist Academy. But people there were different than the people that I canvassed with, and so yeah. So yeah, I graduated in 2010, but a little later. No, I think it's that I would say you gotta have friendship with them. Be their friend, be their buddy. And even though you're older, you can still connect with them just like someone at their age group can connect with them. And I think that's a big part of it, like just being able to have fun with them. Like if they want to go with their girlfriend to the movies, offer to pay for them, but go with them. So do something like they don't want you to go with them, but if you're paying for them, oh sure, okay, So then they can actually see that okay, you can have fun with them, and then it's more like oh, I want Dad to come with me, Well, plus he's gonna pay for me, but we can enjoy our times. I don't know, maybe. I guess I saw that on a movie lately about a dad, or I think I read it in a book maybe, but
Maybe on the internet.
yeah.
One last question, Victor.
I think the greatest threat to this generation, even applying these terms, being overprotective, or being too tolerant. But I don't think it's that. I think the greatest problem with this generation is that why should I care that God exists? Does it make a difference? You know what? It'd be different. I look at other people, and I see these Christians. They all talk about God. But they look at them. They're just as much as I am. What's the point? I can be just as free spirited, just as powerful, cannot be a God. Look at you and realize you're just the same as me, but you have an excuse.
He was just saying that why should I care? That's kind of how I felt. Why do I care about believing in God? I don't know. One viewpoint for a while that I had was I feel like God is putting a gun at me and says, "Follow me or die," kind of idea. And my friend, a PK at GLAW, he told me that. He's like, why would I follow a God like that? But I think you have to realize where sin leads. What is sin? I think it's a definition. Try to understand that. But why should we care? I think that's a big philosophical question that you have to grapple yourself and not look at other people's examples of life, but see Jesus. Look at Jesus, And I guess because he's the closest thing we have to an example of God, right, on earth. I mean, he was God, but I think that I guess you can't look at other people. They say that they're Christian, but then they live just as as secular as the world or whatever, or and they're not happy, right? But you gotta, I don't know. It's hard.
You have insight. You look at other people. If you look at other people, you develop
Insight.
yourself. You
That's
realize things about yourself, and you see things from a perspective. Am I really following God because I want to, or am I just? Am I just not afraid to ask questions?
I feel like he had a question, but if he.
I think we're going to have to end. If you'd like to can you guys stay around for a few minutes? I think they'll stay around for maybe a minute or two. Someone may have other duties, but thank you for coming, and let's continue the conversation.
Thanks, Moses.
Next week continues with Dr. Snyder.
That's right. Dr. Snyder will be here next week. Ken Rogers.
Ken Rogers.